Long before the Templars rose in the 12th century, before knights in white mantles bearing the red cross became the guardians of kings and bankers of Europe, there existed a secret thread woven into the fabric of history, a hidden bloodline whispered of in legends, a lineage that claimed descent from both royal and divine, a line said to carry the power to rule not by sword alone, but by destiny. And though official chronicles dismiss these tales as myth, beneath the surface of history, echoes remained, faint yet persistent, telling of families who guided Europe from the shadows, preparing the ground long before the Templars took their oath at Jerusalem. The story begins in the days of the Merovingians, a dynasty that ruled the Frankish kingdoms from the 5th to the 8th century, remembered as the first kings of France. Their origins were shrouded in mystery. Chronicles claim that their ancestor Merovech was born of a union between a queen and a sea creature, a beast, both man and monster. From this myth, their bloodline was said to carry something beyond the ordinary, a spark of the divine, a right to rule sanctified not only by heritage, but by legend. Their long hair was a symbol of this power, for it was said that to cut the hair of a Merovingian was to strip him of his sacred right, and so they were called the long-haired kings. The Merovingians held sway over Gaul, uniting tribes, battling enemies, forging alliances, yet even as they reigned, they were overshadowed by their mayors of the palace, powerful officials who commanded armies and wielded real power. In time, the Merovingian kings became little more than figureheads, puppets of the mayors, yet their bloodline remained sacred in the eyes of many. A holy lineage believed to descend from Christ himself through the union of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, so the whispers claimed. Whispers that persisted through centuries, whispered by monks in cloisters, by troubadours in songs, by heretics in secret meetings, that the hidden bloodline survived, though the world believed it ended. When the Carolingians replaced the Merovingians, when Pepin the Short seized the throne with the blessing of the Pope in 751, the official story declared that the old dynasty was finished, that the long-haired kings were no more, but the secret story claimed otherwise. It told that not all heirs were killed, that some escaped into exile, that the bloodline survived in hidden places, passed down through generations, waiting for its time, guarded by secret societies, guided by alliances unseen. And it was this bloodline that some believe gave rise to movements that later shook Europe. Movements of knights, of mystics, of heretics, movements that challenged the church itself. The link between the Merovingian bloodline and the Templars would only appear centuries later. Yet even before the Templars, legends of the hidden line shaped politics and prophecy, for to claim descent from such a lineage was to claim not only earthly power, but divine legitimacy. Kings ruled by conquest, but the hidden bloodline ruled by destiny. And in a world where prophecy and myth carried weight equal to armies, such claims could inspire loyalty, rebellion, and fear. Thus, before the Templars ever marched to the Holy Land, before they built their castles and guarded their secrets, the stage had already been set, a secret lineage whispered of in shadows, a bloodline that claimed to shape the fate of Europe. This is where the hidden history begins. The story not of visible empires, but of invisible heirs, not of crowns seen, but of crowns remembered, not of the power of armies, but of the power of blood. The bloodline that some say ruled long before the Templars, and perhaps still rules today. The Merovingians stood at the crossroads of legend and history. They were real kings, ruling real lands, commanding armies, collecting tribute, forging alliances. Yet around them swirled tales that turned their dynasty into something more than mortal. For their enemies feared them not only for their swords but for their blood. Their long hair was said to carry the strength of their lineage. Cut it, and the king would lose his divine right, as if his authority flowed not from crown or church, but from something deeper, something ancient, the very essence of his being. And this symbol became both their power and their curse, for it set them apart as sacred, yet it also made them targets of suspicion and envy. The legend of Merovech. Their mythical founder was whispered by chroniclers with hesitation, for it claimed that his mother was impregnated by a sea creature known as the Kinotaur, a beast with the form of man and bull, emerging from the depths to seed a lineage unlike any other. Whether myth or metaphor, the tale gave the Merovingians an aura of mystery, as if their line carried in it something otherworldly, a right to rule sanctified by forces beyond human control. This myth later fused with another even more controversial, the belief that the Merovingians were heirs of the holy blood of Jesus Christ himself through Mary Magdalene, who, according to secret traditions, fled to Gaul after the crucifixion, carrying not only the memory of her beloved, but the seed of his bloodline. If true, this would make the Merovingians not only kings, but divine heirs, rulers by blood and by heaven. Official church chronicles never admitted such claims, for to do so would undermine the authority of Rome. If Christ had children, then celibacy and priestly mediation lost their absolute value. If Mary Magdalene carried his seed, then the power of women in the story of salvation could not be denied, and so such tales were condemned, hidden, forbidden. Yet they persisted, whispered, in monasteries, encoded in legends, painted in symbols, the fleur-de-lis said to represent not only purity, but lineage. The bees buried with Merovingian kings, said to symbolize resurrection and eternal life, hints that the dynasty was not only political, but mystical, carrying secrets too dangerous for the church to allow. As their reign continued, the Merovingians grew entangled in the politics of Gaul. Their realm stretched from the Rhine to the Pyrenees, from the North Sea to Burgundy. They forged unity out of tribes that had once been rivals. They defeated enemies and spread Frankish influence, yet their real weakness lay within. For as generations passed, the power of the kings weakened. While their mayors of the palace grew stronger, the mayors commanded armies, collected revenues, and soon the kings became kings. In name only, rulers in appearance, while the real authority lay in the hands of their ministers. Still, the kings remained sacred symbols, their blood untouchable, their long hair the mark of legitimacy. No usurper could simply seize their throne, for the people believed the sacred bloodline could not be broken. It was in this tension that the Carolingians rose, beginning with Charles Martel, who defeated the Muslim armies at Tours in 732, securing the Frankish realm and winning fame as the savior of Christendom. His son Pepin. The Short sought more than power. He sought the crown itself, but to wear it, he had to depose the Merovingian king, Childeric III, who, though weak, was still the bearer of sacred blood. The Pope himself sanctioned Pepin's move, declaring that it was better to have a ruler with real power than a king who ruled in name only. And so in 751 Childeric was deposed, his hair cut as a sign that his sacred right was broken. He was sent to a monastery, and the Merovingian line was declared ended. The Carolingians took the throne, and the age of Charlemagne began. Yet in the shadows, whispers claimed the bloodline was not extinguished, that descendants of the long-haired kings survived, hidden among nobles, married into families, carried across regions. The Church and the Carolingians declared the dynasty dead, but legends claimed otherwise. Some said that a secret order preserved them, protecting heirs, ensuring that the sacred blood would one day rise again. Others claimed that the line merged into noble houses of Burgundy and Lorraine, weaving itself into the fabric of European aristocracy, invisible but alive, waiting for the moment to reclaim what was theirs. The Church feared such legends, for if the people believed that Christ had heirs, then papal authority would crumble. For centuries, the Church had claimed to be the sole heir of Christ's mission. the vicar of Christ on earth. But a bloodline descending from his own flesh would challenge that authority, would present an alternative center of legitimacy, not built on Rome, but on blood, not on papal decree, but on lineage. This was the forbidden truth, too dangerous to be admitted, too threatening to be tolerated, and so official chronicles were written to bury it. Heresies were condemned, documents suppressed, yet the memory endured. Troubadours in the Middle Ages sang of mysterious kings, poets wrote of hidden heirs, myths of the Grail emerged. Some spoke of the Grail as not a cup, but a bloodline, the sang real, the royal blood, hidden, preserved, guarded by secret societies. In this fusion of legend and history, the Merovingians became more than forgotten kings. They became symbols of a secret history, the line that carried both power and mystery, the line that had been dethroned but not destroyed, the line that some believed guided Europe from the shadows, preparing for the rise of movements like the Templars who would one day inherit their mantle. For centuries, the Church fought to suppress these ideas, yet they lived in folklore, in architecture, in symbols carved into cathedrals, bees, lilies, crosses, all carrying hidden meaning for those who knew how to read them. The signs of the bloodline were everywhere, the belief that destiny is written not only in scripture, but in blood, not only in heaven, but in the veins of men. This belief haunted Europe, inspiring both devotion and fear, and it would resurface again when the Templars rose, carrying their own aura of secrecy, wealth, and power, so much that people wondered whether they too were guardians of the hidden bloodline, heirs of a legacy that stretched back before them, back to the Merovingians, back to Christ himself. Thus, the fall of the Merovingians was not the end. It was the beginning of a mystery that wound its way through the centuries, invisible yet powerful, forbidden yet alive, a hidden bloodline that some believed ruled Europe not by throne or crown, but by destiny, shaping events in ways unseen, guiding kingdoms from the shadows, waiting for the moment when the truth would be revealed. The story of the hidden bloodline did not vanish with the fall of the Merovingians, though the Carolingians and later dynasties declared the sacred line broken, though the papacy crowned new kings and proclaimed new heirs of divine right. The whispers persisted, carried by troubadours, encoded in legends, preserved in the shadows, and as Europe entered the Middle Ages, these whispers merged with other stories, weaving together myth, heresy, and prophecy into a tapestry of mystery that stretched. Across centuries, the myth of the Grail rose in this period, first appearing in the 12th century, sung by poets and written by chroniclers of romance. The Grail was spoken of as a vessel, sometimes a chalice, sometimes a stone, sometimes a mysterious object of divine power. It was said to grant life, to heal, to illuminate, to reveal truth. Yet in the shadows another interpretation took root, that the Grail was not a cup at all, but a bloodline, the sang real, the royal blood, the secret continuation of the lineage of Christ, preserved through Mary Magdalene and her descendants, woven into the noble houses of Europe, guarded by secret orders, hidden in plain sight. And this interpretation gave the legend new weight. For if true, it meant that the Holy Family was not only spiritual, but physical, that Christ's blood still flowed through the veins of living men and women. The troubadours of Occitania sang of secret love, of noble lineages, of hidden heirs, and their songs often carried double meanings. On the surface, tales of romance, beneath the surface, tales of sacred union. And some scholars believe that these songs preserved memories of the forbidden bloodline, disguised in poetry to escape the watchful eye of the Church, for in this age heresy was hunted with zeal. Inquisitors traveled from town to town, condemning those who dared to challenge orthodoxy, burning books, silencing voices. Yet songs and legends could carry truths too dangerous to be spoken directly, and so the myth of the Grail became a vessel for forbidden history. In the same regions where the Grail legends flourished, heretical movements also arose, most famously the Cathars of southern France, who taught that the world was corrupted by dark powers, that true purity lay in rejecting the material order, that the Church of Rome was not the true heir of Christ but a distortion. The Cathars believed in a higher knowledge, a gnosis that freed the soul from bondage, and though they did not openly proclaim the bloodline of Christ, their emphasis on hidden truth and secret wisdom resonated with the whispers of the forbidden. Many later believed that the Cathars guarded knowledge of the Grail, that their fortresses held manuscripts and relics pointing to the secret lineage, that their destruction in the Albigensian Crusade was not only about heresy, but about silencing what they knew. The Church declared war on them in the 13th century, unleashing a crusade upon its own soil. Towns were massacred, villages burned, entire populations wiped out in the name of orthodoxy. Yet the memory of the Cathars lived on, and with it, the suspicion that their heresy was not merely theological, but genealogical, that they were custodians of a truth too dangerous for Rome, a truth tied to the bloodline of Christ and the destiny of Europe. In parallel, the legends of Mary Magdalene grew in southern France, in Provence and Languedoc. She was venerated not only as a saint, but as the apostle. To the apostles, local traditions claimed that she had arrived there after the crucifixion. Carrying with her companions and perhaps children, she lived in exile, but not in silence. She taught, she passed on her legacy. And though the Church accepted her presence in France as part of hagiography, it rejected the idea that she bore the bloodline of Christ. Yet among the people the legend persisted. Mary not as penitent sinner, but as Holy Mother, bearer of the sacred blood, and her shrines became places of pilgrimage where official doctrine and forbidden memory mingled. The architecture of cathedrals also carried hints. In the 12th and 13th centuries, great Gothic cathedrals rose across France, Chartres, Reims, Amiens, their stones carved with symbols, their glass filled with mysterious images. Some saw in these cathedrals not only the glory of God, but the coding of secret knowledge, labyrinths on the floors, black Madonnas in the chapels, geometric patterns pointing to mysteries, perhaps even to the bloodline. For the builders, the guilds of stonemasons carried traditions of secrecy, passing symbols from generation to generation, and some believe that within their designs they encoded the story of the hidden lineage, a story that could not be spoken but could be preserved in stone and light. The noble families of Europe also played a part. Houses of Burgundy, of Lorraine, of Anjou were sometimes rumored to descend from the Merovingians. Alliances were formed through marriage. Bloodlines merged, genealogies were traced with obsession. For in a world where legitimacy was fragile, descent could mean everything, and if a family could claim even a shadow of the Merovingian heritage, even a whisper of descent from Christ, it could transform politics, it could challenge thrones, it could rival Rome itself. Thus genealogies became weapons, hidden yet powerful, guarded with secrecy, whispered in courts, invoked in rebellions. All these strands, the Grail legends, the Cathar heresy, the cult of Mary Magdalene, the symbols in cathedrals, the genealogies of nobles, wove together into a network of forbidden history, a memory of the bloodline that refused to die, a current beneath the surface of medieval Europe, unseen yet alive, shaping imagination, inspiring resistance, guiding movements that the Church condemned but could not fully erase. By the time the Templars rose in the 12th century, this current was already flowing. They stepped into a Europe where the idea of a hidden bloodline was known, where the Grail was sung of, where heretics whispered of alternative truths, where nobles boasted of mysterious descent. The Templars would inherit this world. They would become associated with secrecy, with hidden treasures, with mysteries of blood and lineage. But they did not create it. They found it already waiting, shaped by centuries of whispers, by the shadow of the Merovingians, by the forbidden memory of the sacred blood. Thus, before the Templars ever built their castles or guarded pilgrims, before they faced trial and destruction, before they became symbols of secrecy, the stage had been set. The hidden bloodline had already shaped Europe, had already inspired myth and fear, had already challenged Rome. The Templars would only add a new chapter to a story far older than themselves, a story of blood and power, of faith and fear, of the forbidden history that ruled Europe, not through crowns of gold, but through veins of blood. As the 12th century approached, Europe stood at the edge of transformation. Kingdoms were growing stronger, cities expanding, commerce increasing. Yet beneath the visible power of lords and kings, there remained the invisible current of legend, the whisper of the hidden bloodline that had flowed since the fall of the Merovingians, a whisper that merged with prophecy and myth, preparing the soil for the coming of the Knights Templar, who in time would be bound forever to the mystery of the sacred lineage. The centuries between the fall of the Merovingians and the rise of the Templars were filled with turbulence, invasions by Vikings, raids by Magyars, wars between nobles, the struggle of the papacy to assert authority over monarchs. Yet even in these chaotic centuries, the memory of the long-haired kings persisted. Nobles traced their ancestry back to Merovingian roots, abbeys preserved genealogies that hinted at sacred descent, and the people told tales of kings who had been betrayed but not destroyed, whose heirs still lived, waiting to return. Like Arthur in Britain, the Merovingians too became once and future kings, their bloodline hidden but not ended. It was in this period that the cult of relics flourished. Europe was filled with shrines claiming to hold bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, vials of holy blood. Each relic drew pilgrims. Each relic affirmed the presence of the sacred in the physical world. And in this culture of relics, the idea of a holy bloodline found fertile ground. For if holiness could reside in bone and cloth, could it not also reside in blood? If relics could transmit power across centuries, could not a family line do the same? This thought resonated with the forbidden whispers, giving them new vitality. The First Crusade in 1096 was itself shaped by visions and prophecies. Pope Urban called warriors to liberate the Holy Sepulchre, to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim hands, promising salvation, forgiveness, eternal life. The armies marched east with crosses sewn to their garments, filled with both zeal and greed. And when they captured Jerusalem in 1099, the Christian world was electrified. Here at last was the holy city reclaimed. Here the blood of Christ had been shed. Here the mysteries of the sacred could be sought. And in the aftermath of conquest, the stage was set for a new kind of order, one that blended knighthood and monkhood, sword and prayer, secrecy and faith. Yet even before the Templars were founded, legends of hidden guardians were told, secret brotherhoods who protected relics, who carried knowledge from east to west, who preserved the mysteries of blood and grail. Some said these guardians were descended from the Merovingians themselves. Others, that they were heirs of the Essenes, or custodians of the wisdom of Solomon. Whatever their origin, the legends agreed that there existed a secret stream of knowledge carried through centuries, waiting to surface when the time was right, and many believed that the Templars, when they appeared, were the continuation of this guardianship. The court of Champagne in France became a center of these currents. The counts of Champagne were patrons of troubadours, protectors of Cistercian monks, supporters of new religious movements. It was here that Bernard of Clairvaux rose, preaching reform, emphasizing purity, supporting the new order that would become the Templars. And it was here, too, that Grail legends were written. Chrétien de Troyes composed his romances under their patronage, weaving the Grail into the imagination of Europe. And though he described it as a vessel, later interpreters linked it to the bloodline, suggesting that the very patrons of these tales were themselves connected to the forbidden heritage. Guardians and heirs of the sacred blood, Mary Magdalene's cult, also deepened in this period, especially in Provence, where legends placed her after the crucifixion. Her relics were venerated. Her shrines became places of pilgrimage. And though the church attempted to define her as penitent, the local devotion often elevated her as apostle, teacher, even mother. Some said she bore the blood of Christ into Gaul, that her children merged with the royal families of the region, that her lineage survived in the nobility of France. If so, then the Grail was not only a relic, but a genealogy, not only a cup, but a womb, the vessel of life itself. Meanwhile, the church sought ever tighter control over faith. Councils were held, heresies condemned, yet each condemnation revealed how restless the people were. From the Cathars in the south to mystics in the north, from sects that rejected wealth to preachers who spoke of inner light, the hunger for forbidden truths grew, and into this hunger the Templars would step, offering secrecy, offering mystery, offering the aura of guardianship, and thus the legends of the hidden bloodline would attach themselves to the order. It is said that when the Templars first established themselves in Jerusalem, they took residence on the Temple Mount, in the very place where Solomon's temple had once stood. Here they dug, here they searched, here they guarded, and from this act, legends grew, that they discovered ancient scrolls, relics, perhaps even evidence of the bloodline itself, that they became custodians not only of pilgrims, but of secrets, and these secrets linked them to the hidden history, stretching back before their foundation. The connection between the bloodline and the Templars was not accidental. Both carried the aura of holiness mingled with secrecy. Both challenged the monopoly of Rome without openly defying it. Both inspired fear and fascination. Both seemed to draw power from sources invisible, and thus the people whispered that the Templars were the guardians of the Grail, and if the Grail was the bloodline, then they were protectors of the heirs of Christ, protectors of the sacred kingship that Rome had tried to destroy. Thus, in the centuries before the Templars rose, Europe was already pregnant with the forbidden. The Merovingian legend persisted, the Grail myth spread, Mary Magdalene was venerated, Cathar heresies flourished, nobles traced sacred ancestry, cathedrals encoded symbols, and secret guardians preserved knowledge, all waiting for the moment when knights in white mantles would appear, taking oaths of poverty and obedience, yet accumulating wealth and power, moving in shadows, guarding treasures, carrying mysteries, and becoming forever bound to the legend of the hidden bloodline. In this way, the Templars did not create the secret history. They inherited it. They stepped into a stream that had been flowing for centuries, a stream that began with the long-haired kings, that continued with whispers of Magdalene, that merged with the Grail, that survived through heretics and mystics, and when the Templars rose, that stream surged into visibility, drawing suspicion, admiration, and fear, and binding the order forever to the forbidden blood that had ruled Europe unseen. The Knights Templar were founded in the aftermath of the First Crusade. The holy city of Jerusalem had been captured in 1099, but the road from the coast to the city was still filled with danger. Pilgrims from across Europe flocked to the Holy Land, seeking the places where Christ had walked, yet many were robbed, killed, enslaved, and so in 1199, a small group of knights took vows to protect them, among them Hugues de Payan and Godfrey de Saint-Omer, men of noble lineage, men who vowed poverty, chastity, and obedience, and who dedicated themselves to the service of Christ and his pilgrims. They became known as the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ, and the Temple of Solomon, for their headquarters was established on the Temple Mount, and from this place their legend would grow. At first they were few, humble, dependent on donations, but within a decade their order received the blessing of the Church. At the Council of Troyes in 1129, they were formally recognized, and Bernard of Clairvaux, himself wrote in their praise, declaring them knights of Christ, warriors who combined the sword of battle with the shield of faith, monks who rode into combat, living paradoxes of prayer and war, and with such endorsement, their order expanded rapidly. Donations poured in, nobles gave lands, kings granted privileges, and soon the Templars became not only warriors but landowners, bankers, builders, rulers of estates stretching from England to Jerusalem. The speed of their rise was astonishing, and with it suspicion grew. How could a handful of knights become a vast order so quickly? How could they gain wealth and power surpassing many kingdoms? The official answer was that their devotion inspired generosity, that their victories inspired trust. Yet, in the shadows, another answer circulated, that they possessed secrets, that from the Temple Mount they had recovered treasures hidden since the days of Solomon, scrolls containing forbidden knowledge, relics of the Holy Family, perhaps even proof of the bloodline itself, and that this secret gave them power beyond ordinary men. Knowledge that made kings bow and popes fear. The Templars were unique in their independence. They answered not to kings, but directly to the Pope. They paid no taxes, they built fortresses, they minted coins, they created a network of commanderies across Europe, each linked to the others, each able to send funds, arms, and men quickly. They became the first international order, and in this independence some saw a shadow government, a power behind thrones, a guardianship of mysteries that extended far beyond pilgrim roads, and in this role they resembled the secret guardians spoken of in legends before them. Protectors not only of people, but of secrets, not only of land, but of blood. The connection to the hidden bloodline deepened through their associations. Many of their founders and patrons were linked to the nobility of Champagne, to houses rumored to descend from the Merovingians, to regions where the cult of Mary Magdalene flourished, to lands where the Grail legends were first sung. It was in Champagne that Chrétien de Troyes wrote of the Grail. It was from Champagne that Bernard of Clairvaux promoted the order. And in this convergence, the Templars became bound to the Grail myth, whether by chance or design, whether as guardians of a relic or of a lineage. Their identity became inseparable from the forbidden whispers. In Jerusalem, they guarded not only pilgrims but sites of immense symbolic power. The Temple Mount was central to Jewish, Christian, and Muslim history, the place of Solomon's temple, the place of sacrifice and presence, and the Templars dwelt directly upon it. Excavating, building, searching, legends say they discovered hidden chambers, scrolls of ancient wisdom, maps, relics, perhaps even the Ark of the Covenant, and among these secrets perhaps evidence of the bloodline, proof that Christ had heirs, proof that Mary Magdalene had borne his children, proof that the Merovingians were not myths, but reality. Such proof, if revealed, would shatter Rome, and so it was guarded, passed in secrecy, encoded in symbols, preserved for those who knew. Across Europe, the Templars grew into financial power. Kings deposited wealth with them, nobles borrowed from them. They created systems of letters of credit, allowing pilgrims to deposit funds in one land and withdraw them in another. They became the bankers of Christendom, and in this role they wielded influence that rivaled thrones. Yet their financial power was not only material, for if they held proof of the bloodline, they held spiritual leverage as well, a weapon greater than armies, the knowledge that the authority of Rome rested on silence, and that silence could be broken. Their rituals, too, inspired suspicion. They initiated members in secret. Their oaths were binding, their ceremonies hidden. Outsiders speculated about blasphemies, about idols, about strange kisses, about denial of Christ, but some believed these accusations were distortions of deeper truths, that the Templars possessed rights linked to the forbidden history, that they honored Mary Magdalene, that they preserved memory of the sacred union, that their secrecy was not corruption, but guardianship, protecting a lineage too dangerous for the world to know. In the south of France, where Cathar heresies had been crushed, where Grail legends flourished, the Templars built castles and commanderies. They moved in the very lands where whispers of this bloodline were strongest. They protected roots, where pilgrims and troubadours mingled. They built churches with symbols that some say point to Magdalene, to the Grail, to the blood. And in this region, the connection between the Templars and the Forbidden grew strongest, so much that later centuries would weave them inseparably into the story of the hidden bloodline. Kings feared them. Popes relied on them. The people both revered and suspected them, and through it all their aura of mystery deepened, for they seemed to be more than soldiers, more than monks. They seemed to embody the secret guardianship spoken of for centuries, heirs of a line of forbidden truth, protectors of knowledge, stretching back before their foundation, back to the Merovingians, back to Magdalene, back to Christ himself. By the end of the 12th century, the Templars were at the height of their power. Their castles dotted the Holy Land, their estates stretched across Europe, their coffers rivaled treasuries of kings. Their name inspired both awe and fear. Yet the higher they rose, the more dangerous their position became, for power breeds envy, wealth breeds suspicion, secrecy breeds paranoia, and the forbidden history they guarded, if true, made them a threat not only to monarchs but to Rome itself. For if the bloodline was real, if Christ had heirs, then the Church was no longer the sole heir of salvation, the papacy was no longer supreme, and the entire edifice of Christendom trembled. Thus the rise of the Templars was inseparable from the rise of their mystery. They were not only warriors but custodians, not only monks but guardians of forbidden history. Their power came not only from swords and gold, but from secrets, from the suspicion that they held knowledge that could overturn kingdoms, that they held the key to the bloodline that had ruled unseen, and that they themselves were part of that unseen rule. By the middle of the 12th century, the Knights Templar stood as one of the most powerful institutions in Christendom. Their white mantles with the red cross were seen on battlefields from Jerusalem to Spain. Their castles rose like guardians over hills and rivers. Their treasuries overflowed with gold. Their estates covered the map of Europe. Yet their greatest power was not in what could be seen, but in what was unseen, the web of secrecy that surrounded them, the sense that they were more than warriors, more than monks, more than bankers, that they were guardians of mysteries stretching back into forbidden history, mysteries that kings and popes feared but could not ignore. Their network was unlike anything Europe had known. Commanderies in every kingdom linked by loyalty to the order and by direct obedience to the master in Jerusalem. Lands in France sent revenues to castles in Syria. Estates in England funded fortresses in Spain. Ships carried supplies across the Mediterranean. Messengers moved safely under the protection of the Red Cross. And in this network, they held power beyond borders, a state within states, invisible yet present. Their word carried weight across continents. Their seals guaranteed trust, and their coffers grew richer than many monarchies. Their banking system became the backbone of crusading. Kings borrowed from them to fund wars, nobles entrusted them with wealth. Pilgrims used their letters of credit to travel safely. The Templars became the bankers of Europe, yet their banking was unlike that of mere merchants. It was infused with secrecy and symbolism. Transactions carried across lands by codes, by seals, by rituals, and some whispered that behind this lay not only financial skill, but secret knowledge, knowledge drawn from ancient scrolls found beneath the temple, knowledge that allowed them to manipulate wealth as if by alchemy, turning paper into power, trust into gold. Their castles, too, inspired awe, built with precision, often upon ancient sites, sometimes with symbols carved into stone that spoke to those who could read them. Circles, crosses, stars, designs that hinted at mysteries beyond architecture. Their fortresses at places like Acre, Tortosa, and La Rochelle became more than military strongholds. They became centers of knowledge, libraries, treasuries, places where secrets were kept, where perhaps relics of the hidden bloodline were stored. And legends soon grew that in their castles the Grail was guarded, that within their walls lay evidence of the sacred blood. The Order's spiritual life was equally enigmatic. They followed a rule that bound them to poverty, chastity, and obedience. Yet their poverty was paradoxical, for the Order itself was immensely wealthy. They renounced personal possessions but lived surrounded by riches. They vowed obedience but answered to no king. They claimed chastity, but were accused of strange rituals. And in these contradictions, suspicion grew, for secrecy breeds imagination, and imagination in medieval Europe often turned to the forbidden. People wondered whether their rituals preserved teachings suppressed by the Church, whether their secrecy hid devotion to Mary Magdalene, whether they were protectors of the sacred lineage. Their relationship with the papacy was close yet uneasy. Popes granted them privileges that placed them outside the authority of bishops. They answered only to Rome. They moved freely. They paid no taxes, yet this very independence made them dangerous. They could not be controlled. They could not be silenced. They held wealth and arms beyond papal reach. And though popes used them as instruments of crusade, they also feared their secrets. For if the Templars truly guarded proof of the bloodline, then the papacy itself rested upon fragile ground. Its authority could be shattered with a single revelation. Kings too depended on the Templars, yet feared them. In France, England, Spain, and Portugal, monarchs borrowed from their treasuries, relied on their castles, used their ships, yet envied their independence. For no king could command them, no crown could bend them. They stood as a parallel power, not only within kingdoms but above them. And in this many saw echoes of the forbidden history. The idea that a hidden lineage ruled not through crowns but through secrecy, that the Templars were its visible arm, the guardians of its invisible throne. The Grail legends grew stronger in this age. Chrétien de Troyes had written of the mysterious vessel at the court of Champagne. Wolfram von Eschenbach transformed it into a stone of power. Other poets wove it into tales of knights and quests. Yet beneath the poetry whispers spread that the Grail was not a cup, but a bloodline, the sang real, the royal blood. And who better to guard such a secret than the Templars, who lived in secrecy, who dwelt upon the Temple Mount, who carried symbols unknown to the common faithful. And so in the imagination of Europe, the Templars became bound to the Grail, and through it to the bloodline. The Cathar heresy lingered. Even after the Albigensian Crusade, survivors fled to mountain fortresses. Some found refuge in lands where the Templars held power, and rumors spread that the two were connected. That the Templars protected heretics not out of rebellion, but out of shared knowledge. That the Cathars and the Templars both preserved fragments of the forbidden history. Both carried memory of truths Rome had sought to destroy. That both were heirs of the ancient guardianship, and that within their union, the bloodline remained alive. Symbols multiplied. The Black Madonna statues venerated in Templar lands were seen as signs of Magdalene, dark yet holy, mother yet mystery. The labyrinths carved in cathedrals echoed journeys of quest. The bees of the Merovingians appeared in Templar seals. The fleur-de-lis adorned their patrons, and those who studied these signs saw a hidden pattern that the Templars were not merely an order of knights, but the continuation of the sacred bloodline, its guardians, and perhaps its heirs. By the late 12th century, their influence extended beyond Christendom. They negotiated with Muslim rulers. They traded with the East. They built a network of intelligence that spanned continents. They knew secrets of roots, of politics, of treasures. They moved with knowledge beyond any other order. And this knowledge itself became a form of power, one that linked them again to the forbidden. For knowledge was the essence of the Gnostic Gospels, the gift of awakening. And if the Templars carried forbidden knowledge, then they carried the spirit of those heresies. Rome had condemned. Their growing aura of mystery fueled both devotion and fear. Peasants revered them as holy knights, nobles envied them as rivals, poets sang of their deeds, enemies whispered of their blasphemies. Yet through it all the question remained. What secret gave them such power? What hidden truth did they guard? And many answered with the same whisper, that they guarded the bloodline, the lineage of Christ, the proof that Rome had buried, and that their wealth, their castles, their independence, all were built upon that forbidden foundation. The Templars reached their height in the 13th century. Their order spanned Christendom. Their coffers rivaled kingdoms. Their influence reached popes. Their armies fought in crusades. Yet as their power peaked, so too did the danger. For power invites destruction, wealth invites envy, secrecy invites suspicion, and the forbidden truth they carried, if true, made them the most dangerous institution in Europe. For they did not merely hold gold or castles, they held history itself, a history that if revealed could undo crowns and papacies alike. Thus the Templars at their height stood as both guardians and threats, admired yet feared, envied yet needed, their white mantles shining in battle, their red crosses feared by enemies. Yet behind the image of holy warriors lay the shadow of forbidden truth, the whisper of the bloodline, the secret history that ruled not by throne or sword, but by veins of blood, flowing unseen, yet shaping destiny. And it was this secret that would one day lead to their destruction. For secrets can inspire power, but secrets can also summon doom. By the dawn of the 14th century, the Templars stood at the height of their earthly power, yet also at the edge of their downfall. For while their castles were strong and their coffers full, while their ships crossed seas and their banners rode into wars, their independence had grown intolerable to kings. Their secrecy had become too thick for popes, their aura of mystery too heavy for rivals. And behind it all lay the whisper of forbidden history, the suspicion that they guarded truths more dangerous than armies, truths that could shake the thrones of Europe and the authority of Rome itself. In France, their power was most visible. Their estates covered the countryside. Their commanderies dotted every region. Their treasuries lent gold to nobles and kings. Their banking network allowed them to move funds invisibly. Their fortresses offered refuge, and their white mantles marched beside crusading armies. Yet it was in France also that their greatest enemy would arise, King Philip IV, known as Philip the Fair, a monarch both ambitious and indebted. His wars against England and Flanders had drained his coffers. His struggles with the papacy had sharpened his hunger for control. He looked upon the wealth of the Templars not as sacred treasure, but as prize waiting to be seized. And he looked upon their secrecy with suspicion that hid his envy. Philip had long borrowed from the Templars. His wars were funded by their loans. His treasury sometimes emptied into their vaults. He owed them more than he could repay, and in this debt lay danger. For a king who cannot repay, a creditor must destroy him. And so Philip began to weave a net of suspicion, whispering of blasphemy, of heresy, of corruption, accusations that the order worshipped idols, spat upon the cross, denied Christ, engaged in perverse rites, accusations that on the surface seemed scandalous, yet in the shadows may have been distortions of something deeper, perhaps echoes of rituals tied to the forbidden bloodline. Perhaps signs that the Templars preserved memory of Christ, not as Rome proclaimed, but as the hidden history whispered. The papacy too grew uneasy, though earlier popes had protected the Templars and granted them independence. By the early 14th century, the seat of Peter had been moved to Avignon, under French influence. The Pope was now within Philip's grasp, and the Templars, once allies of Rome, had become too powerful. Their order was beyond papal taxation, their secrets beyond papal scrutiny, and rumors that they guarded knowledge dangerous to Rome itself stirred fear. For if they held proof of the bloodline, if they preserved the true story of Christ, then the authority of the papacy could collapse. Thus, Pope Clement V found himself caught between fear of the Templars and pressure from Philip. The fall began on a single day, Friday the 13th of October, in the year 1307, when Philip ordered the arrest of all Templars in France. Dawn raids swept across commanderies. Knights were dragged from their beds, treasuries seized, archives confiscated, accusations read aloud. The order was charged with heresy, idolatry, blasphemy, unnatural rites. The charges shocked Christendom, yet behind them lay calculation. Philip sought gold. He sought independence from debt. He sought to break a rival power, but perhaps he also sought to silence secrets too dangerous to survive, secrets whispered of in forbidden history. Under torture, many Templars confessed to strange rites. Some said they spat upon the cross in initiation. Some said they worshipped a mysterious head called Baphomet. Some said they engaged in unnatural acts. Confessions twisted by pain, by fear, by the desire to end torment. Yet within these confessions, scholars later saw hints of something else. The spitting upon the cross may have been symbolic rejection of Rome's authority. The worship of a head may have been veneration of John the Baptist, or perhaps a relic of Christ's line. The kisses may have been part of secret rites preserving memory of sacred union. Distortions, perhaps, of rituals tied to the forbidden history. Rituals that outsiders could not comprehend. Rituals that, in the hands of inquisitors, became proof of heresy. The trials dragged on for years. Some Templars recanted, some held firm. Many were burned, their estates confiscated, their order dissolved by papal decree in 1312. Yet the secrecy that surrounded them ensured that their destruction did not erase their legend. Instead, it deepened it, for people asked why such an order had been destroyed with such ferocity, why a pope had bowed to a king, why accusations so fantastical had been believed, and many answered with the same whisper that the Templars had guarded secrets too dangerous for kings and popes, secrets tied to the bloodline, secrets that had to be silenced with fire. The death of Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, became a symbol. Burned in Paris in 1314, he cried out that both the king and the pope would soon face judgment, and within a year both were dead. The curse of the Templars entered legend. Yet behind the curse lay a deeper truth, that the order had been destroyed but not erased, that its secrets had been scattered but not silenced, that its guardians had perished, but its memory lived, and among that memory the most forbidden whisper of all, that the Templars had preserved proof of the sacred bloodline. Legends soon multiplied, that the Templars had fled with their treasures, that ships had sailed from La Rochelle carrying gold and relics, that some knights found refuge in Scotland, in Portugal, in remote mountains, that their order lived on in secrecy, transformed into new brotherhoods, new societies, Freemasons, Rosicrucians, guardians of hidden knowledge, each claiming descent from the Templars, each carrying symbols linked to the forbidden history, bees, lilies, crosses, labyrinths, black Madonnas, all pointing back to the same hidden truth, that the bloodline had not been destroyed but preserved, passed through generations, still ruling unseen. In Portugal, the Templars were officially dissolved yet reformed as the Order of Christ, continuing their estates and traditions under a new name. In Scotland, legends told of their aid to Robert the Bruce at Bannockburn, fighting under secret banners, protecting a king who stood outside papal favor. In Spain and Germany, their memory lingered in folklore. In France, their name became a symbol of both holiness and heresy. And in all these places, the question endured: what had they truly guarded? What was so dangerous that kings and popes conspired to erase them? The Grail legends grew stronger in their absence. Poets wrote of quests, knights searched for vessels, yet in the whispers the Grail was no cup but the bloodline, and the Templars had been its guardians, perhaps even its heirs. And so their fall was not only the fall of an order, but the scattering of a secret that survived in shadows, in symbols, in whispered genealogies, in forbidden texts, waiting for the moment when it could surface again. Thus, the turning tide against the Templars was not merely political. It was part of the larger struggle over forbidden history, the battle between kings and popes on one side, and the hidden bloodline on the other. The Templars stood at the center of this struggle, visible as soldiers, invisible as guardians, destroyed as heretics, yet remembered as protectors of the most dangerous truth of all, that Christ may have left heirs, that his blood still flowed, that his lineage still ruled, not by crowns seen, but by crowns hidden, not by armies visible, but by destinies unseen. And so their destruction did not end the story. It only deepened the mystery. It only made the forbidden more alluring. For the absence of the Templars created a vacuum, filled by legend, by speculation, by fear. And in that legend, the bloodline continued, carried not only in the veins of families, but in the imagination of Europe, a power greater than kings, a history greater than chronicles, a truth greater than decrees, forbidden yet eternal. When the smoke of the pyres of Paris had faded, and the ashes of Jacques de Molay scattered upon the Seine, the world believed that the Templars were no more. Kings had seized their estates, the Pope had dissolved their order, their leaders had perished, their castles stood abandoned or handed to rivals. Yet history has a way of preserving what power seeks to erase, and the story of the Templars did not end with their suppression. Rather, it entered a new phase, one of legend, one of secrecy, one of whispers that refused to die, whispers that bound them forever to the forbidden history of the bloodline. In Portugal, their survival was most visible, for there the crown valued their skill and their estates rather than destroy them. King Denis transformed them into the Order of Christ, granting them a new name, a new banner, but allowing them to keep their lands and traditions. Thus the Templar spirit lived openly, though under a mask, and it was through this order that Portugal would later launch voyages of discovery, ships carrying crosses of the order across oceans, explorers guided not only by trade, but perhaps also by the lingering spirit of guardianship, the sense that they carried forward the mission of secrets preserved from the past. In Scotland, legends told another tale, that Templar knights had fled there after the arrests in France, that ships had sailed from La Rochelle across the sea, carrying treasure and relics, that they found refuge with Robert the Bruce, who had been excommunicated by Rome, that they fought beside him at Bannockburn in 1314, helping secure Scottish independence. Though chronicles remain silent, folklore insists that the strange banners seen on the battlefield were Templar, that knights in white mantles charged with Scottish cavalry, and that from this alliance the Templar legacy passed into Scottish traditions, preserved in secrecy, re-emerging centuries later in the lore of Freemasonry. In Spain and Germany, their estates were absorbed into other orders, yet their symbols remained carved in stone. Their chapels remained filled with mysteries. Their memory endured among the people, in whispered tales of hidden treasures buried beneath commanderies, of scrolls hidden in crypts, of relics spirited away before inquisitors arrived. Relics perhaps tied to the bloodline, relics that could prove the forbidden truth, relics that the Order would never surrender. From these scattered remnants, the legend grew that the Templars had not died but gone underground, that their order survived in secret, that they had carried with them the most dangerous truth of all, the memory of the sacred bloodline, the proof that Christ had heirs, the genealogy that Rome had suppressed, and that they continued to guard this lineage through secrecy, through symbols, through societies that emerged in later centuries, each claiming to inherit their mantle. The Grail legend grew stronger after their fall. Poets wrote of hidden vessels, of quests, unending, of knights seeking not gold, but truth. Wolfram von Eschenbach described the Grail as a stone of power guarded by a brotherhood, a description many linked to the Templars. And in later interpretations, the Grail became not only a relic, but a bloodline, the sang real, the royal blood, and the Templars were remembered not only as guardians of pilgrims, but as guardians of the Grail, guardians of the bloodline, protectors of the forbidden history that had shaped Europe, unseen in southern France, where Cathars had perished and Magdalene was venerated. Tales grew that the Templars had hidden there, that they had taken refuge in caves and castles, that they preserved manuscripts and relics, and in these lands the legend of the bloodline never faded. Shrines to Magdalene remained. Families traced descent to the Merovingians. Troubadours sang veiled songs, and within this culture, the memory of the Templars blended with the older memory of the hidden heirs, forming a single stream of forbidden tradition, unbroken by crusade or inquisition. The papacy tried to erase them, yet even Rome could not control the imagination of the people. Peasants whispered that the Templars were holy martyrs. Nobles whispered that they were victims of royal greed. Mystics whispered that they were keepers of truths too sacred to share. And through these whispers, their legend survived stronger than their order. For power may seize castles, but cannot seize memory, cannot seize the hunger for secrets, cannot seize the fascination with forbidden history. It was in this vacuum that new societies arose, groups that claimed descent from the Templars, or at least inspiration, some purely legendary, others real, some devoted to mystical knowledge, others to political influence, yet all bound by secrecy and symbols. Rosicrucians spoke of hidden masters and sacred wisdom. Freemasons wove rituals filled with references to the temple, to the building of Solomon's house, to the guardianship of secrets. And within these rituals, some saw the continuation of the Templar spirit, encoded in allegory, preserved through centuries, waiting for those who could read the signs. The Freemasons, in particular, became linked to the bloodline legend, for their rites spoke of hidden kings, of builders preserving wisdom, of brotherhoods protecting secrets from corruption. And many believed that within their symbols lay the memory of the Templars, that within their genealogies lay traces of the forbidden lineage, that their secrecy was not empty ritual, but living memory. Memory of the sacred blood guarded since the Merovingians, preserved through the Templars, transmitted through the Masons, hidden in plain sight. Yet beyond ritual and symbol, noble families continued to trace descent. The houses of Lorraine, of Anjou, of Burgundy, all claimed links to the Merovingians. Genealogies were guarded, marriages arranged, alliances formed. And in these claims, the forbidden bloodline continued, not in books, but in veins, not in libraries, but in flesh. For in Europe, lineage was power, and to hint at descent from the sacred was to carry a weight beyond armies, a legitimacy beyond crowns. And so the bloodline persisted, hidden yet powerful, denied yet influential. Stories of treasure haunted the ruins of Templar castles. Peasants dug in the night searching for gold, but some believed the true treasure was not gold, but parchment, not jewels, but knowledge. Scrolls that told of Christ's bloodline, maps of genealogies, evidence of Magdalene, proof of heirs, proof that the church was not the sole heir of salvation, proof that kings did not rule by divine right alone, but by blood. And if such scrolls existed, they would never have been surrendered. They would have been hidden, passed in secrecy, guarded with those who inherited the Templar vow. Thus, in the centuries after their fall, the Templars became more powerful in imagination than they had been in reality. They became symbols of lost secrets, guardians of hidden truths, martyrs to forbidden history. Their name evoked awe and fear. Their symbols inspired speculation. Their legacy inspired societies and movements, and always at the center was the same whisper, that they had preserved the bloodline, that they had carried forward the forbidden truth that Christ's heirs lived, that the hidden blood still ruled, unseen yet real. The church may have burned them, kings may have seized their estates, but legends declare that their ships sailed. Away, their treasures escaped, their heirs survived, their secrets endured. And in these legends the forbidden history continued, flowing beneath the surface of Europe, shaping its myths, guiding its societies, waiting for the day when the truth would no longer be forbidden but revealed. The 17th century dawned with Europe scarred by wars of religion, kingdoms torn between Catholic and Protestant, armies burning towns, peoples displaced, faith turned into battle cry. And in this time of turmoil, men searched not only for political peace, but for deeper truths. Truths that could transcend the divisions of creed, truths hidden from the reach of Rome and kings. And into this hunger, the legends of the Templars and the forbidden bloodline resurfaced, clothed in new forms, whispered in secret lodges, published in manifestos, hidden in codes of philosophers, preserved through the rise of Freemasonry and the Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucian manifestos appeared first, mysterious tracts circulating in Germany in the early 17th century, speaking of a brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, guardians of hidden wisdom, heirs of ancient knowledge, reformers of science and faith, their words cloaked in allegory, their existence uncertain, yet their impact immense, for they suggested that there existed a secret order, invisible yet powerful, carrying truths older than Rome, guiding humanity toward enlightenment. And many believed that behind the symbol of the rose and the cross lay the legacy of the Templars, the memory of the hidden guardians, and within that memory the most dangerous whisper of all, that the sacred bloodline survived. The rose itself was a symbol of secrecy, of love, of hidden knowledge, and the cross of sacrifice and redemption. Together they suggested union, union of opposites, union of divine and human, and some saw in this union the memory of Magdalene and Christ, the sacred marriage, the bloodline born from their union, preserved in secrecy, encoded in symbols and guarded by brotherhoods that survived the fall of the Templars, passing through the centuries, resurfacing in the age of manifestos. Freemasonry emerged soon after, lodges spreading across Europe, drawing nobles, merchants, thinkers, men of influence, their rituals, clothed in allegory of building, of Solomon's temple, of hidden architects, their symbols squares, compasses, pillars. Yet beneath these outward signs, many saw the memory of the Templars, for Masonic rites spoke of ancient builders preserving wisdom, of secrets passed from generation to generation, of guardianship against corruption. And in these rites, echoes of the Templar legacy rang clear. The temple they spoke of was not only stone, but blood. The building they guarded was not only architecture, but lineage. The hidden treasure they preserved was not only knowledge, but the forbidden bloodline. Freemasonry's secrecy attracted suspicion, yet it also attracted those who sought truth beyond dogma. Kings and nobles joined. Philosophers and revolutionaries entered lodges. Men who would shape modern Europe swore oaths in secret chambers, and within these chambers whispers of forbidden history continued, coded in symbols, spoken in allegories, preserved in genealogies, passed from one initiate to another, until the lodges themselves became heirs of the Templar guardianship, heirs of the bloodline legend. The 17th century was also the age of science. Galileo turned his telescope to the heavens. Descartes declared his cogito. Newton described the laws of motion. Yet even in science, the hunger for hidden truth persisted. Alchemy gave birth to chemistry, astrology to astronomy, mysticism to mathematics, and many scientists themselves were initiates of secret societies. Men who studied nature with reason, but sought meaning with symbols, who believed that behind the visible lay the invisible, that behind the material lay the spiritual. And in this search, the forbidden bloodline remained a possibility. The union of divine and human, made flesh in Christ and Magdalene, continued through heirs, preserved in veins, the living proof of sacred mystery. The Enlightenment of the 18th century brought new light, yet also new shadows. Thinkers challenged the authority of kings and popes, demanded liberty, equality, fraternity, demanded reason over dogma. Yet behind the slogans lay lodges where symbols of Templars and Grail persisted, where whispers of the bloodline were passed. For the Enlightenment was not only rational, but esoteric, not only public, but secret. And in the hidden chambers of masonry, the forbidden truth continued, clothed in allegory, passed in oaths, preserved through rituals. Revolutions erupted in this age, in America, in France, in Europe. And many leaders were Masons. Their slogans carried the spirit of liberty, their acts the destruction of old thrones. Yet some whispered that behind the revolutions lay more than politics, that behind them lay the hand of the hidden guardians, that the bloodline itself guided history, breaking crowns, ending papal power, preparing a new world, a world where the forbidden truth could one day surface without fear. And so the age of revolutions became also an age of bloodline prophecy. The belief that destiny itself was unfolding. In France, the revolution shattered the monarchy. Guillotines rose, kings fell, churches burned, the power of Rome collapsed. Yet among the chaos, symbols of the forbidden emerged. Marianne, as symbol of liberty, resembled Magdalene. Statues of black Madonnas were linked to revolutionaries, Masonic lodges guided debates, and whispers spread that the revolution itself was the work of heirs, that the bloodline had moved history, that the destruction of thrones was the revenge of the long-haired kings betrayed centuries earlier, returning not with swords, but with destiny. In America, too, the influence of secret societies was strong. Founding fathers were Masons, their symbols encoded in the new republic, the eye upon the pyramid, the unfinished temple, the stars, the numbers, and some claimed that the new nation was itself built upon the hidden guardianship, that across the ocean the forbidden history had taken root, that the bloodline had extended its influence beyond Europe, shaping not only kingdoms but continents. Thus, in the 17th and 18th centuries, the forbidden history survived not in open chronicles, but in secret lodges, in manifestos, in revolutions, in symbols carved into architecture, in genealogies whispered in noble courts, in art and allegory. The memory of the Templars carried forward, the bloodline preserved in secrecy, its influence seen not in crowns, but in upheavals, not in papal decrees, but in revolutions, not in armies, but in lodges, shaping the modern world unseen. The Enlightenment claimed to bring reason, yet behind reason symbols lived. The age claimed to bring liberty, yet behind liberty whispers continued. The new world claimed to begin, yet behind it, the old bloodline endured, forbidden but eternal, hidden but real, guiding history through secret hands, through secret heirs, through the forbidden truth that Christ had left a lineage that survived through centuries, that shaped kingdoms, that inspired revolutions, that prepared the modern age. The centuries that followed the fall of the Templars were centuries of silence on the surface, and yet centuries of persistence beneath. For though the order had been dissolved, though kings claimed their lands and popes declared their end, their legend refused to fade. And as Europe moved into the Renaissance, a time of rediscovery, of knowledge, of questioning authority, the whispers of the forbidden bloodline and the guardianship of the Templars began to surface again, hidden in art, encoded in symbols, disguised in myth, yet alive and waiting. The Renaissance was a rebirth of the ancient world. Scholars rediscovered Greek texts, Roman laws, Hebrew scriptures, and with them came a hunger for origins, for truths buried by time. The Church sought to control this knowledge, yet printers spread it, humanists questioned it, mystics reinterpreted it, and within this ferment the memory of the Templars and the legend of the hidden bloodline found new voices. For in an age when men dared to Question even Rome. The forbidden truth seemed less impossible, less unthinkable, more tempting to believe. Artists became the new keepers of secrets, their canvases filled with beauty, and yet filled also with mystery. Leonardo da Vinci painted the Last Supper, with Magdalene seated beside Christ, or so some claimed, her figure disguised as John, her posture leaning toward him, suggesting intimacy, suggesting partnership. And those who looked beyond the surface saw not only apostles, but heirs. Not only supper, but legacy. And in Leonardo's notebooks were sketches of geometry, of symbols, of codes, as if he preserved fragments of knowledge too dangerous to speak, fragments tied to the forbidden history. Other artists, too, carried symbols. Botticelli painted figures whose poses echoed ancient myths. Michelangelo carved prophets whose gestures hinted at hidden meaning. Cathedral windows showed Magdalene raised to apostolic dignity. Black Madonnas were venerated in shrines across Europe, their dark skin seen by some as symbol of hidden wisdom, as sign of the mother sorrying the sacred blood. And in these works the legend endured, encoded in beauty, preserved in stone and pigment, waiting for those who had eyes to see. Esoteric societies flourished in this period. Alchemists sought transformation not only of metals, but of souls. Rosicrucians spread manifestos of hidden wisdom. Mystics wrote of secret traditions passed down through brotherhoods, and though their language was veiled in allegory, though their rituals cloaked in secrecy, many saw within them echoes of the Templars, echoes of guardianship, echoes of forbidden truth, that beneath their talk of gold and stars they preserved memory of the bloodline, that their true treasure was not alchemy, but lineage, not stone but blood, the blood that had once flowed in the veins of the long-haired kings. Genealogies became obsessions in this age. Noble houses commissioned records of descent, tracing their lines back not only to Charlemagne but further, to Merovingians, to Trojan princes, to biblical kings, and in these genealogies whispers of the forbidden bloodline reappeared, veiled yet persistent, that certain houses carried the sacred blood, that within their marriages the legacy of Magdalene survived, that in their veins ran the sangreal, the royal blood, and though never declared openly, these whispers influenced politics, for lineage in Europe was power, and a hint of sacred descent was a weapon greater than. Armies of the church still condemned heresy, still silenced those who spoke too boldly, yet its power was waning. Schisms divided it, reformers challenged it, and in this weakening the forbidden truth found new space. Secret texts circulated, apocryphal gospels rediscovered, writings that spoke of Magdalene as apostle, of Christ as husband, of heirs unacknowledged, texts hidden in monasteries, texts smuggled by scholars, texts read by mystics, and though most remained unknown to the masses, they shaped the imagination of the few, the keepers of secrets, the guardians of forbidden memory. The Renaissance also saw voyages across seas, discoveries of new lands, encounters with new peoples, and in these journeys the legacy of the Templars resurfaced. For in Portugal, the Order of Christ guided exploration. Prince Henry the Navigator drew upon their resources. Their symbols sailed on the caravels that reached Africa, India, and beyond. And in these voyages, some believed they carried not only trade but mission, not only gold but guardianship, carrying the forbidden bloodline across oceans, ensuring its survival not only in Europe, but in lands beyond. The Protestant Reformation erupted in the 16th century. Martin Luther nailed his theses. Kings and princes defied Rome. Churches split, wars raged, and in this upheaval, the authority of the papacy shattered, and once more whispers of forbidden history gained strength. For if Rome could be wrong on indulgences, could it not be wrong on lineage? If popes could err in doctrine, could they not err in suppressing the truth of Christ's heirs? and among reformers and radicals alike, the suspicion spread that the Church had hidden more than corruption, that it had buried the very blood of Christ, that the Templars and their heirs had guarded what Rome feared most. Secret codes filled books of the era, emblems carried double meanings. Poets spoke in allegory, philosophers cloaked their truths in symbols, and within these codes, many saw references to the forbidden, bees and lilies pointing back to Merovingians, roses and crosses pointing to Rosicrucians, labyrinths and towers pointing to Templars, Magdalene hidden in imagery of Venus, Christ hidden in imagery of Apollo, a web of signs across art and literature, all pointing back to the same forbidden truth, that the bloodline survived, that the heirs lived, that Europe was ruled not only by crowns of kings, but by veins of sacred blood. In southern France, the legends persisted strongest. The shrines of Magdalene continued to draw pilgrims. Troubadour songs were remembered. Tales of Templar treasure endured. Families whispered of descent from sacred lines. Cathar castles stood in ruins, but in memory remained symbols of lost wisdom, and within this region the bloodline legend breathed, never silenced, never forgotten, preserved in folk memory, carried forward in secret traditions, feeding into the wider currents of Renaissance mysticism. Thus, in the Renaissance, the forbidden history did not vanish but transformed. It moved from castles into canvases, from fortresses into folios, from knights into artists, from rituals into symbols, preserved not by open orders, but by secret societies, by poets, by painters, by philosophers, who carried forward the memory of the bloodline, who whispered in allegory what could not be spoken openly, who encoded in stone and paint and ink the truth that Christ had heirs, that his blood survived, that the lineage still ruled unseen. By the end of the 16th century, Europe was divided. Wars of religion raged, powers shifted, empires rose and fell. Yet through it all, the forbidden history endured. Not in chronicles, but in whispers, not in papal decrees, but in symbols, not in crowns, but in blood. Preserved through art, through secret orders, through noble genealogies, waiting for the moment when it would surface again, when the hidden bloodline that ruled Europe would no longer be hidden but revealed. The 19th century was an age of change, of revolutions and empires, of nations rising and collapsing, of science advancing yet myth reviving. And within this age, the legend of the forbidden bloodline found new life, carried not only by secret lodges, but by poets, by artists, by historians who turned to the past with longing, who sought in ruins and legends the roots of identity, who rediscovered the memory of the Templars and the whispers of the sacred lineage, weaving them into romantic visions and nationalist dreams. Romanticism swept across Europe as reaction to the rationalism of the Enlightenment. Poets and painters turned to myth, to mystery, to the Middle Ages, to ruined castles and forgotten heroes. And in this return, the Templars reappeared, no longer condemned as heretics, but celebrated as martyrs, as guardians of secrets, as tragic knights betrayed by kings. And with them returned the whispers of the bloodline, for the Romantics loved tales of hidden heirs, of lost kings, of destinies preserved in shadow, and the forbidden history became once more the material of song and story novels and operas told of grail quests. Wagner composed Parsifal, weaving together mysticism, chivalry, and the grail. Audiences filled halls, hearing music that spoke of knights seeking not only relics, but truth. And beneath the music lay the suggestion that the grail was not a chalice, but a bloodline, that the quest was not for a cup, but for heirs, that the true guardians were not vanished but hidden, that Europe itself was still shaped by their destiny. And the Romantic Age embraced these whispers, turning forbidden history into cultural myth. Historians, too, revived interest in the Templars. Scholars studied their records, their trials, their fall, Yet even academic works could not escape the aura of secrecy, the suspicion that the charges of heresy masked something deeper, that their destruction was not merely political, but an attempt to silence secrets. And as books spread, the public imagination revived the idea that the Templars had preserved forbidden truths, that their treasure was not gold but knowledge, that among their secrets was proof of the sacred bloodline. And the 19th century made this legend respectable again, no longer whispered only in lodges, but written in books, read in salons, debated in universities. Secret societies multiplied in this age. Freemasonry continued to expand, its lodges filled with noble and revolutionaries, its symbols more widely known, its influence suspected in every upheaval. Yet alongside Masonry, new orders arose. Rosicrucians re-emerged, Martinists, Illuminists, groups that blended mysticism, politics, and secrecy, each claiming links to the Templars, each claiming guardianship of hidden wisdom, and within their rituals the whispers of the bloodline persisted, preserved in allegories of sacred union, in genealogies traced in silence, in symbols of roses and crosses, lilies and bees, Grail and Temple nationalism too drew upon these legends. As people sought to define their nations, they turned to myths of origin, to kings of the past, to sacred lineages. And in France, some looked back to the Merovingians as the first true kings, heirs of sacred blood, betrayed yet never extinguished, a lineage that could inspire modern identity. In Germany, poets spoke of Grail knights as symbols of purity and destiny. In Britain, Arthurian legends were revived, linking the Isle to hidden heirs and once and future kings. And throughout Europe, the forbidden bloodline became not only myth, but symbol of national soul, of continuity across centuries, of sacred destiny shaping modern peoples. Science advanced, Darwin published his theories, machines filled factories, railroads spanned lands. Yet even as reason triumphed, mysticism endured, spiritualism arose, seances gathered the curious. Mediums claimed contact with spirits, theosophy blended East and West, and in these spiritual currents the idea of hidden masters persisted, that secret brotherhoods guided humanity, that guardians preserved truths, that the Templars had not perished but survived, that the bloodline had not ended but lived, and believers saw in seances and symbols the fingerprints of forbidden history. Writers of the age seized upon these currents. Victor Hugo filled his works with symbols. Balzac hinted at secret societies guiding destiny. Poets wove imagery of Grail and Temple, of Magdalene and hidden heirs. And in these works, the forbidden bloodline moved from whispered legend to literary motif, present not only in lodges, but in literature, shaping imagination of nations, inspiring both faith and speculation. In the south of France, the legends never faded. Shrines to Magdalene continued to draw pilgrims. Peasants told tales of Templars hiding treasure in caves. Nobles whispered of descent from sacred line. And in this land, the forbidden bloodline breathed through folk memory, through processions, through chants, through ruins that bore the silence of massacre. And romantic travelers wrote of these places, spreading their aura across Europe, feeding the growing fascination with Cathars, with Templars, with Magdalene, with the bloodline that survived in stone and song. The 19th century also saw empire expand. Europe conquered lands in Africa and Asia. Missionaries carried crosses, armies carried guns. And yet in these encounters, Europeans rediscovered ancient traditions, scrolls, gospels, inscriptions, and among them hints of alternative Christianities, of Gnostic texts, of apocryphal gospels that spoke of Magdalene, that spoke of heirs, and scholars brought these back to Europe, fueling once more the suspicion that the Church had suppressed the truth, that the Templars had known it, that the bloodline was real. Thus, the century of reason and machines became also the century of myth and revival, a century where forbidden history moved from shadows to stage, from whispers to novels, from symbols to opera, where the bloodline legend was woven into the fabric of national identity, into art, into politics, into philosophy, shaping Europe unseen. For even as kings fell and republics rose, the idea persisted that behind crowns and parliaments, behind revolutions and empires, behind the visible tide of history, there endured the hidden lineage, the forbidden blood that had ruled from shadows for centuries. By the end of the 19th century, this legend had grown. Immense, secret societies flourished. Novels spread stories of Templars and Grail. Painters filled canvases with Magdalene and knights. Scholars studied apocryphal texts. Pilgrims visited shrines, and the people whispered still of heirs, of treasures, of forbidden truths. The bloodline survived not only in veins, but in imagination, not only in flesh, but in myth, not only in history, but in legend, waiting for the modern world to carry it forward into a new century, where its power would once more be felt. The 20th century was an age of light and darkness, of machines and slaughter, of discoveries and destructions, of freedom and tyranny. And within its upheavals, the forbidden history of the bloodline resurfaced again, not as a relic of the past, but as a living force, woven into the obsessions of rulers, into the dreams of writers, into the codes of secret societies, into the fears and hopes of people searching for meaning. In a century of chaos, world wars reshaped the map of nations. Empires collapsed, republics rose, ideologies clashed, and in the midst of these storms, men turned again to myths. For even in an age of tanks and telegraphs, the hunger for sacred lineage endured. And among the most sinister of these obsessions was that of the Nazis, for they sought not only military conquest, but mystical legitimacy. They searched for Aryan roots, for sacred relics, for bloodlines of purity, and among their quests was the Grail, the very symbol of forbidden history, sought not as cup, but as lineage, not as relic, but as proof of destiny. The Ahnenerbe, the research institute of the SS, sent expeditions across the world, to Tibet, to the Middle East, to the Pyrenees, seeking evidence of ancient blood, of hidden lineages, of relics tied to the Grail, of traditions preserved in Cathar lands where Templars once ruled. And in these quests, the Nazi regime revealed its obsession, the belief that power lay not only in armies, but in blood, not only in guns, but in lineage, not only in conquest, but in forbidden history, twisted to its ideology, corrupted into nightmare. Yet proof that even in the 20th century, the legend of the bloodline could shape nations. At Montségur, the Cathar fortress in the south of France, legends told that the Grail had been hidden before the massacre, carried down the mountain by secret guardians, preserved in caves, protected by descendants, and Nazi officers sought it there, digging, searching, convinced that within stone lay relics of destiny, convinced that the forbidden history held power that could shape their empire. And though they found nothing visible, their very search testified to the enduring grip of the legend, the belief that the bloodline survived, that the Grail remained hidden, that the heirs of Christ still lived. Secret societies too multiplied in the 20th century. Freemasonry persisted. Its lodges spread across continents. Rosicrucians grew. Theosophy rose. Golden Dawn emerged in England, blending ritual with mysticism. Aleister Crowley proclaimed himself guardian of hidden wisdom, and in all these currents, symbols of Templars and Grail endured. Roses and crosses, compasses and squares, lilies and bees, Magdalene and Christ, the bloodline preserved not in chronicles, but in ritual, not in parliaments, but in chambers, whispered still, forbidden, yet alive. The 2 world wars destroyed millions, yet in their aftermath the hunger for meaning deepened. People searched for myths to explain suffering, for legends to give shape to chaos, and the forbidden history reappeared in literature, in novels, in films, in theories that sought to connect the tragedies of the century with ancient struggles, with hidden guardians, with bloodlines unseen. The Grail appeared in stories once more, knights returned in modern garb, and audiences embraced them. For even in an age of bombs, the quest for sacred lineage still stirred the heart. In the mid-20th century, scholars uncovered the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, apocryphal gospels at Nag Hammadi, texts that revealed diversity of early Christianity, texts that spoke of secret teachings, of Gnostic wisdom, of roles for women, of visions of Christ beyond dogma, and among them hints that Mary Magdalene had been central, that she had been beloved, that she had been teacher, and though the church resisted, the discoveries spread, fueling once more the suspicion that the truth had been hidden, that the bloodline was real, that the Templars had known it, that the forbidden history had been preserved. The latter half of the century brought cultural revolutions, countercultures, the search for spirituality beyond institutions. New Age movements embraced the sacred feminine, raised Magdalene from penitent to apostle, honored her as mother, as vessel, as grail. And in these movements, the forbidden bloodline gained new life, no longer whispered in lodges, only but spoken in books, in gatherings, in rituals of seekers who rejected Rome and sought the lost truths of Christianity, truths buried in blood and lineage. Literature carried the legend into millions of hands. Books like Holy Blood, Holy Grail in the 1980s argued that Christ and Magdalene had married, that their heirs became the Merovingians, that the Templars had guarded this truth, that secret societies had preserved it, that Europe itself had been shaped by it, and this work spread widely, feeding imaginations, stirring debates, inspiring novels, most famously the Da Vinci Code. In the early 21st century, which brought the legend of the bloodline into popular culture worldwide, making Magdalene once more a name on every tongue, making the forbidden history a story known to millions. Yet beyond literature, the symbols persisted. Black Madonnas continued to be venerated. Shrines to Magdalene in southern France drew pilgrims. Freemasonry continued its rituals. Secret orders claimed descent from Templars. Genealogies still whispered of sacred lines. Families in Europe still traced ancestry back to Merovingians, and in all this the forbidden bloodline endured, not as fantasy but as living thread woven into the fabric of identity and power. The 20th century ended with technology spreading, the internet connecting the globe, information flowing beyond borders, and in this digital age the forbidden history too spread, theories circulated, symbols analyzed, genealogies traced, legends retold. More than ever, people questioned official narratives. More than ever, the suspicion grew that behind history there lay another history. Forbidden but real, hidden but enduring, the history of the bloodline, the lineage of Christ and Magdalene, preserved through Templars, through societies, through symbols, through whispers, shaping Europe, shaping the world. Thus, even in the modern age, even in an age of satellites and science, the legend remains, perhaps because myth carries truths deeper than fact, perhaps because blood carries power deeper than armies, perhaps because the human heart longs for hidden destiny, and so the forbidden history continues, alive in whispers, alive in shrines, alive in art, alive in secret orders, alive in books, alive in imagination, and the bloodline endures, flowing still, ruling not with crowns of gold, but with crowns unseen, ruling not with armies, but with memory, ruling not in chronicles, but in veins forbidden yet eternal. And so the story reaches our own time, where kings are fewer, where thrones are fragile, where Rome is weakened, yet where the fascination with forbidden truth has never been greater, where millions know the legend of the Grail, of Magdalene, of Templars, of hidden heirs, where the bloodline remains the greatest secret of all, whispered through centuries, carried across ages, still shaping our destiny, still waiting for the day when the forbidden will be revealed, and the hidden rulers of Europe will stand in the light,